The story begins in the very center of attention, the Imperial Hall, in which the Emperor himself is present with his wife and his 2 children, as well as very many guests. Everyone is waiting for the most important news, but she is waiting for it the most. The Emperor sitting on the throne announced with a slight chuckle and in a pathos voice that this was his reward to her for winning the war, the right to choose a spouse. After these words, the girl was pierced by hundreds of sharp daggers, for she was waiting and asking for her deserved reward, offered by the Emperor himself, money. The girl wanted to rebuild the ruined lands. The Emperor went on to express his opinion that anyone she chose would have to marry her. As is customary at social gatherings, the presence of guests is inevitable. As in this case, there were a lot of guests. After hearing the news, women and men did not hold back and began to whisper that to marry this girl. After all, she hadn't even studied etiquette. And someone said in general that he heard this wench could smell blood for kilometers. Someone began to worry about what if she wanted his son as a husband. The heroine stood in the middle of this hall and was shattered, as if she had spent a month in continuous battle. She just didn't understand how it was. Why such a price of all those countless battles she had fought to gain victory had fallen on her spouse's choice. The great warrior Pervez, the hero of the Imperial army who saved the crown prince 30 years ago. And for greed and envy, the prince sent a warrior to the northern lands to exterminate the Lura tribe. A dedicated warrior went on this mission knowing it would be his last. That warrior was her father, Pervez, the lands left behind by the Empire with no support in the territory where they were sent to die. Her father fought bravely, but still died on the battlefield. After his death, her brothers led the army, but they died too. After that, she took their place. And then one day, fighting on the battlefield and having killed the last enemy, as it seemed to her, she was exhausted and without strength. One of the warriors came running to her and shouted, "Asha, there is an end to the war! They have won!" Back to their troop of warriors who had survived the last battle, they cheered and were very happy and relieved that at last they had won and the war was over. It had been a long winter for them. As it turned out, the joy of winning the long war did not warm their souls, as they might not survive this winter and die of hunger and cold. Back at the castle of Pervez, Asha and his warriors rushed to the chest, in which lay a document very important to them. One of the warriors said, "So she can receive a reward from the Imperial family?" Although Pervez is not part of his domain, and he does not even look towards these lands. Asha jabbed her finger at the document, showing Dicker to look at his decree. The Emperor had made them promise that if they drove the lawyer tribe completely out of Pervez, he would repay them. The decree stated that after winning the war on behalf of Felix Donin, Richard Elbin Fondel Evaristo, he would reward them according to their conscience for their good work and sacrifices. Dicker was very doubtful whether the Emperor would keep his promise, but Asha supported the guy, because she was sure that they had no other choice. Simply, Asha realized that if they did nothing, the city of Pervez would starve to death. The girl guessed that it wouldn't be easy to get compensation, as the Emperor who had sent her to her death wouldn't be willing to pay the reward. And so back a little earlier to the Emperor's hall, where the Emperor announced his decision. Sitting on the throne, Emperor Kenric Evaristo asked in surprise. Her father was killed. Very sad. Though there wasn't an ounce of sadness in his face. He only expressed his opinion that since all her brothers were dead, the title of Marquise of Pervez passed to her, answered that correctly with a nod of her head. The girl didn't know his decision at this point, but she was very anxious for him to fulfill his promise. The Emperor, smiling, replied that he didn't even know him. The smile suggested that he had already done something about it, and not at all in Asha's favor. Pafoso imposed, he announced that the feral princess came out to them. The guests present at this event immediately picked up, began to whisper, repeating after the Emperor that she is a wild princess, and this title to match her, people at any time suitable for profanity. But Asha stood her ground, not giving any sign that she didn't like it. She was a true warrior, though a girl who should wear ball gowns and attend social gatherings, She was defending her land. Asha pressed her lips together with nerves, because she didn't care how much humiliation she had to endure. She only wished that the people of Pervez had enough money to feed themselves this winter. There was a question from the Emperor. "My dear, how old is she?" The girl took a step forward, bowed, and said, 22 years old. The Emperor emphasized that at that age, it was time to make her debut in society. Goodness, she hadn't even gotten married by calculation yet. Those words from the Emperor sounded like an indignation towards Asha. She didn't know what to say to him, because she wasn't interested in men at this stage of her life. She was defending the city, fighting a war. Why would he suddenly bring that up? And now finally, Asha waited for those cherished words, when the Emperor said that he had decided what to reward her with. The girl realized that something was wrong, because the smile on the Emperor's face confused her. The Emperor declared that the right to choose a partner for marriage was the only thing he could bestow upon her for her victory. As we said earlier, that hearing the news made the girl feel as if hundreds of daggers were piercing her in her head. Only one question sounded. Why? But it didn't end there. The girl was handed a book and told to choose someone she liked from this list of nobles. Anyone she chose would become her husband immediately. The Emperor decided to share his advice, telling her that for her information, the higher a person is on the list, the more honorable their position. So the advice is to pay attention to the beginning. Asha was confused. She didn't know what to do. She knew she had to ask the Emperor if the man she chose didn't want to marry her. Wouldn't that be bad for both of them? But the Emperor didn't care. His opinion was that if they tried to violate the Emperor's order, his entire family would be obligated to make payments to the Emperor's family and her. The girl was surprised at such an act, but she heard the right words for her. Already at that moment she had a staggering plan. She's figured it out. It was a ploy by the Emperor not to spend the money himself, but to extract it from his subjects. Asha realized that no parent would give their son to a savage like that. The chosen family would have to pay her instead of the Emperor. And then she said to the whole room that she was choosing the Duke of Carlile Haven. It was the guy sitting next to the Emperor. But who is he, this fellow Carlile Haven Evaristo? He's been temporarily stripped of his title as Crown Prince. Because of the recent incident that happened a day ago, he is the only one on the list of nobles who is a member of the Emperor's family. Closed this book she had been given, and said she had taken the Emperor's advice. Your Majesty, every name is at the beginning of the list, and I have chosen a very nobleman. The Emperor became furious. The smile disappeared from his face at once. He gritted his teeth and furrowed his brow. The people in the hall immediately picked up on those words and started gossiping that she was crazy. How can one choose Crown Prince Carlile to be her husband? Or is it because of his disagreement with his father that he has been stripped of the title of Grand Prince for the time being, yet he is called the god of war and a murderer? Somebody said this girl is asking for trouble. Well, that's a lot of people's opinions. But only Asha realized what she was doing now. With a firm look, she said, "If the Emperor refuses, his son's family will be obliged to pay me." Sighs broke out in the hall. People were surprised at such a statement from Asha. No one dared to whisper or say anything here. It was just that some people were thinking that she seriously intended to shake off the money from the Emperor after all, meaning that her reward to be paid by the Imperial family would be taken from the fund. Some thought that the Emperor himself let her choose, and he also dug his own grave. Carlile, sitting on his throne, laughed because he realized what she was up to. His father wanted to replay the whole thing, but he failed. The boy was laughing wildly, unable to even stop. Emperor was furious with his throne and began to shout for the Marquise Pervez he would give her another chance to change her choice. Asha stated with firm conviction that she only wanted to marry the Duke of Carlile. But if they wanted to pay the reward for their victory in money, she would refuse. As suddenly to the whole hall as to the Emperor, Carlile rose from his seat and said loudly, "No!" Confident that the Emperor's promise is no joke, she can't retract her words so easily. The boy stood up and walked towards Asha. saying that it was not permissible for him, the eldest son, to take a girl from the village as his wife. However, he could not cancel his father's promise either. The boy walked over to Asha, stood opposite her, and mumbled, "Marquesa Pervez, he accepts her marriage proposal." Asha had a bunch of thoughts in her head. Why she just needed the money now and not her husband. Carlile stepped closer to her, looking at her with an affectionate gaze, hoping they would get along. His future wife. A while later, in the drawing room of the palace, the Marquis is sitting on an armchair drinking tea. There is a chair opposite him too, and a cup of tea is prepared on the table for Asha. He is waiting. Visiting said he was calling for her. The boy looked at her, taking a sip of tea, and said, "Approach boldly, Marquise." Asha looked at him and thought he looked relaxed. It wasn't clear from his face what he was thinking about. The girl wondered what the conversation would be about, after which she bowed and solemnly said, "May the head of the Imperial family be crowned with great glory. She, Asha Pervez, salutes you, your Highness Duke." When she lowered her head, she thought to herself, she had forgotten that he was no longer Crown Prince. She should have called him Duke. Carlile looked at her and wondered, does she know why he was stripped of his title? The girl raised her gaze to his, but she really didn't know. As it was, the day Asha and her team arrived in the capital, it was still summer outside, with her warriors sitting near a fountain and reading a document. One voiced his opinion that he heard a guy harassing his own father's favorite. One of the warriors, and he's having relationship problems. Then Asha thought that people in the capital were very different. It was normal for them to desire and spend time with different women. That document Asha was holding turned out to be a local newspaper that said Prince Carlile had been stripped of his title of Crown Prince. Since that was so, she had never dreamed that the man who had been written about in the paper would become her husband. From memory, let us return to the present, when Carlile said that there was nothing he could do about it anyway. Carlile tired a little uncomfortable with Asha's stare. He asked her something she could answer nothing, but she didn't need to look at him so inquisitively. Or he could allow the idea that he had won her over with his attraction. Though Carla, he was having a hard time dealing with someone he didn't know. Your thoughts were completely different, not about beauty, she thought, but that she was just jealous of his physique. She's a warrior, and she doesn't have the muscular shoulders that he has. The guy came to a shock. He didn't expect her to say that. The girl continued telling him, "Of course, there is a disadvantage, because the larger a person is, the easier a target he becomes. But there's a power that comes from such a body." The boy was a little upset because he thought she was interested in him in a slightly different way, not from a position of suitability for combat. Well, Asha sat back and expressed her admiration for his body, because she'd like to be just like him too. But it's almost impossible. She has a different muscle structure. Carlile grinned a little, because he found that answer interesting. He thought, so it has a different structure. It's natural. After the guy coughed and offered to discuss their case, because she herself realizes that her proposal accepted me because of great love. Then Asha immediately thought she was getting out and suggested he continue. Carl liked Asha's reaction too. She immediately lit up in her eyes and screeched. He continued, "Father has set conditions for the title to be returned to him. If he serves the Empire for 3 years and gets rid of his selfishness, he'll get his title back." Here he thought he could help Pervez, who was war-weary for the next 3 years. Pasha was more interested in the question, what then after these 3 years? The guy took a cup of tea that was barely warm. It had already cooled down during this conversation, took a sip, and said clearly, "Divorce." Asha was surprised at the word divorce. She was certainly comfortable with it. And if he kept his word and actually divorced her and cleaned up the town, then that would be the way to go. Carlile went on to say that she would turn a blind eye to what he would be doing in Pervez for the entire 3 years, and also will not expect him to treat her as his wife, and don't even think of relying on anyone else. Therefore, if she is comfortable with all of this, he will financially support Pervez. Asha understood that he had agreed to the marriage for a specific purpose, but she couldn't give Pervez over to a stranger's control. For that reason, she asked to be told what he was going to do in Pervez. If his actions could cause harm, she was against it. Carlile became indignant, repeating, "Against? She wants the people of the city to starve? Certainly he does not wish to harm either. In return, help him succeed with his scheme." AJ lowered her head and replied that she understood, but offered to draw up a contract. He said he would provide the funds to settle them. She wanted a contract clarifying the details. Carlile realized she didn't trust him, and his promise to just let her like that. They'd make a good couple. Asha was suddenly surprised. They would be a couple, but the girl emphasized that only in words, and would take from each other what they needed, and afterward, they would part ways. That's what he means, isn't it? Carlile answered her a little wryly. "Gee, how nice. They're communicating, Marquise Pervez." A little later, a treaty was drawn up which stated that the first party would support the other party in the territory of Pervez in the following ways. First, an immediate solution to the pressing question of famine in Pervez. Second, the provision of seeds needed by the town for agriculture for 10 years. Third, the provision of medicines and medical advice for 2 years. Fourth, an undertaking to pay for the construction of all the frontier works. Carlile had his closest advisor Lionel Bailey in his office. The guy who read this contract emphasized that she had taken everything into account. Carlile replied that Asha was the kind of person who wouldn't waste money. The counselor asked if he would really marry such a rude girl. There are so many candidates for his heart. Carlile convinced the counselor that it was only for 3 years, when he'd still have such a chance to undo what he'd done. Lionel muttered in surprise. "A chance?" Carlile propped his head up with a wistful hand and told him it was a chance to get rid of someone who had a lot of attitude. From the age of 15, he has been involved in battles. After the death of his mother, his stepmother became the Empress. He fought again and survived. Perhaps the day he was born, God blessed him. Carlile was greeted by musicians with songs in the streets, and the words said that the blood of the enemy was on his face, and the glint of the sun in his eyes, the victorious wine on his lips. Such is the killer of monsters. The people cheered, crying out, "Long live Prince Carlile, defender of the Empire!" When he returned from battle, he was greeted by his subjects with applause and flowers. At this very moment, the current Empress Beatrice was standing on the balcony with her son, the second Prince Marcius. The woman realized that if she wanted her son to take the Emperor's throne, something had to be done. There she took that occasion. What happened to Carlile? His minion Lauren ran to the Emperor and began to complain that the prince was breaking into her chambers in the middle of the night. Carlile tried to explain that he didn't know she was there to set him up, but his father wouldn't listen to him, yelling at him to shut his mouth. His ignorance had gone over the edge. Now he and his lover needed. Emperor gave him a stern instruction that he was taking the title of Crown Prince from him. It just so happens that her father's favorite, and the Empress in general, is planning to get rid of all those she doesn't want, Carlile said with a sigh. Counselor realized that now the bottom line was that Marcius was now temporarily Crown Prince, and the Empress's plan had succeeded. Though even after 3 years, she may try to prevent you from regaining the title and make Marcius the true Crown Prince. Carlile became angry, pounding his hand on the table, and said that it was his throne, and he would kill anyone who encroached on it. Carlile must become so powerful that the Empress cannot reach him. Pervez is the perfect man for the job. Lionel also confirmed that is correct. It is located outside the lands of the Empire. Then it suited Carla that Pervez's heiress was with him. Lionel wondered if that meant he was marrying a stranger after all. He knew what kind of person she was. Carlile assured her it wasn't the first time he'd seen her. Lionel wondered how that was. They had seen each other earlier. Carlile began to tell me that he had seen her a few days later in the capital. He was walking through the alley one evening, upset about the incident because he had been stripped of his title and because he had fallen into the Empress's trap. He threw his cloak over himself so no one would recognize him, and just wanted to be alone. He realized himself that he should have been more vigilant and it was his own fault for reacting quickly to an email from a new informant asking to meet with him. The guy thought he would be assassinated as a last resort, but he didn't think the title of Crown Prince would be taken away from him. There's a rumor that he's locked himself in his chambers out of shame. We can use that to make a sneaky sortie. As a friend in the alley turned out, a trio of unidentifiable men began harassing him with the words, "Dear." One of them put a dagger to his throat, and the other took a rope to strangle him in case of emergency. Their chief leader looked at his face. He looked familiar to him, and to get out of here unharmed, he said, "Do as they say." Carlile thought that if the situation escalated and it became known that he was hiding his identity, there would be trouble. Then he was definitely finished. By sheer luck, he just happened to have two people walking by nearby. They said, "Hey, 3-on-1 isn't fair." The ringleader who had attacked him asked in surprise what this was about. And then out of those two, a girl came forward and said, to be fair, they're going to join that one guy. There's 3 of you, and then it's 3 against 3. The ringleader said, "Whoa, so she's a wench," and one of their attackers added, "Look, the beggar is crazy." After saying that, the beggar slapped their leader in the face. The man fell down, having gotten a good punch from this beggar, and at their words the other 2 shouted, "Boss!" which caused the girl to not stop. She grabbed him, rising from the ground by the scruff of his neck. At this moment, Carlile thought, this girl is holding up well. She must be a warrior. Then this attacker's partners started to panic. One says to the other, "Why are you standing up? Go kill her." After these words, the warrior who was standing near the girl went over and grabbed this conspirator, telling him that if you want to kill, then do it yourself. There is no need to send the younger coward. The girl's friend asked Asha if she wanted to kill them, and Asha said she should. It was too merciful. Carlile thought after those words that her words were not idle chatter. She thought she was speaking. He knew right away that these 2 were used to killing. But her partner had said they'd been told not to get into trouble until they got to the palace, and Asha had confirmed that was true. Then we'd better let them go. The attackers turned out to be cowards. They fled as fast as they could, one shouting to the other, "Run, run, hurry!" Then Carlile asked how he could thank them. They had made him safe, and he would like to repay them for their help. Then Asha's partner said that could he guide them to a cheap and comfortable hotel instead. It's just that if they don't find somewhere to stay, their group will have to sleep outside. Asha added that the prices in the capital are very high, and there's only 5 of them. If they can wash there, they could all sleep in the same room. Carlile had no trouble helping them. He walked the boys to where they needed to go so they could clean up. These are the kind of memories Carlile has of Asha. Lionel, the counselor, cried out because he realized why Carlile had come back then so late. It was because of the Marquise. Carlile thinks he was the reason they were able to clean themselves up. If they had come to the palace as they were then, they would probably have been labeled a beggar rather than a feral princess. The counselor clutched his head. He could only imagine how she dealt with the bandits with her bare hands, and if Carlile made a single mistake, she'd wipe him out. But Carlile wasn't worried that Asha would do anything to him. On the contrary, he was sure that now the Empress would hardly be able to sick assassins on him. The counselor scratched his chin and thought that, yes, it was certainly a great advantage to have such a strong wife. Carlile realized that for the sake of Pervez's restoration, she would not betray him and stay out of his way. He offered to let her stay at his manor, but she declined and returned to the inn. She must be more comfortable there, so she is very careful not to see or be around Carlile too much. Is there a better wife than her? At the same time, there is a very fervent conversation going on in the room about her and her team's marriage situation. One of the guys blurted out, "Contract marriage? How's that?" "It's very dangerous. The prince wants to use you as a shield for his operation." But Asha was sure none of that mattered. The warriors tried to explain how unimportant it was. "Mistress, your life is in danger." But she realized that if their deal would save the city, she'd take it. In her opinion, the deal was a very good one. With the money, no one would starve in the winter. They could heal the wounded, and they could plant fields with seeds. Decker just has to imagine the empty plains being covered in grass. If he were her, he'd do the same. The girl is happier now than she's ever been. Decker asked, "Mistress, when is the wedding?" Pasha took off her cloak and hung it on a chair to dry a little. At this point, she replied that fortunately they were not having a ceremony and would go into overdrive as soon as they made their short vows. Just vows. I wonder how long it will take, the boy wondered. Even a full ceremony wouldn't take months. Decker was concerned that while they were here, Pervez's men would surely starve. The next morning, Asha arrived at Carlile Manor. She had a looming question about when they could leave. Next week or in 2 weeks? In general, of course, the sooner the better. The boy hesitated a bit at Asha's words. The sooner the better. It's a wedding, after all. Wouldn't she be upset if they rushed it? When he decided to joke a little and said that she might have a lover waiting for her there. What was the rush? The girl wondered at his stupid question. Like what? The people there are waiting for her return, starving. Carlile hesitated, but then said he would try to speed up the preparations as much as possible. Her job was to choose a dress from the ones she had and take it to the alterations. Pasha thanked him and said fine. Then the boy gave Mrs. Lopar an order. She could start. Asha tensed and wondered what exactly to start. She was surrounded by 2 maids who took her under their arms and led her somewhere. Now Asha realized what Carlile meant by start was to get her cleaned up. The first thing was the bathroom. The girl was surrounded by just dozens of maids, some washing her hands, some washing her hair, some washing her feet, and so on. There was a lot of lather. And there were also a lot of questions asked by the maids. For example, like, "Miss, what does she wash her hair with?" The girl would answer, "Soap." After these words, the maids were horrified. "How soap and perfume use? And oils as well?" Answered, "Why does she need them on her hair?" After that, it was on to the corset. One of the maids asked her, "Don't you usually wear corsets?" She'd never seen a waist like that before. Barely able to get the corset together in order to tie it, Asha, who was holding onto the wall, was screaming about how she couldn't breathe. The next turn was the dress fitting, and there was no shortage of criticism. She's too tall and her shoulders are broad. Look at those muscles, sleeveless dress. And the end of all this preparation was the cherry on the cake. A bunch of maids gathered in one room and began to quarrel among themselves, discussing what dress to choose for her. Some shouted, "No pearls! They don't suit her!" Someone said, "What about puffy sleeves?" The girl was criticized. "Puffy sleeves! It makes her shoulders look even wider." What is she, stupid? And only Asha, sitting on the floor, was thinking how much she wanted to go home. Carlile sat on the couch, studying some papers and waiting for Asha to come out. Suddenly he saw Asha standing in the doorway. He himself was surprised that she had gotten ready so quickly. The girl looked gorgeous, her hair tousled, her dress modestly restrained, her waist tucked beneath the corset. When she came in, she said, "Your Highness," and Charles could not help laughing, replying to her, "Marquise, God forbid any of your crew should see you, especially with that expression on your face." Asha put her hands at her sides, very annoyed because she was never allowed to pick out her own outfit and wear in this outfit to even secure her weapons. What to defend herself with? The maid Lepar, an elderly woman, came into the room and said it was all right to wear a simple dress for such an occasion. The Marquise insisted she was more comfortable in it. A servant came into the room. He was holding a red-colored box. Carl replied, "It's all right, he's got something ready." Taking the box in his hands, Carlile said Mrs. Lopar it would adorn him, meaning the dress. The maid was very much surprised and opened her mouth. She said, "This is the necklace of the former Empress Evelyn, your mother. If one were to wear such a magnificent piece of gemstone jewelry, it would only be under a simple dress." "Yes, you're right," Carlile said, unable to believe he had decided to give away such a precious item. At this point, Asha was watching and still didn't understand what was going on, but rather was probably more surprised by such an act. She asked, "Are those rubies?" And the maid replied that she recognized them at first sight. Asha walked over to take a closer look, for she knew a thing or two about jewelry. And Carlile thought, looking at the girl, that she didn't care about the jewelry itself, because all she had known all her life was battle. The boy held out this precious necklace to the girl and said that if you sold it, you could buy about 100 war horses. Asha was horrified and immediately started calculating in her head. Hundreds of horses! Does he mean it's worth more than 1,000,000 varons? The guy opened the box, took out this necklace and put it around the girl's neck, saying, "Consider this your down payment." Well, Asha, like Asha, immediately began to think of business, for that necklace could buy 100 horses. Yes, but wouldn't it be better to stock up on provisions first? Carlile helped fasten the necklace around the girl's neck, and it suited her well. He stood and admired her, remembering a little about his mother. Beyond that, he not only saw but also smelled a slight and subtle whiff of a pleasant odor, quite different from the one then in the alley. He asked, "Did you really use perfume?" Asha became uncomfortable. She said, "Yes," turning around to face the guy. The girl began to say that the maids had brought various perfumes with the scents of flowers and fruits, but she found them too sweet. So she chose one that smelled of grass. Carlile looked at her, and the girl realized something was wrong. The guy was either upset or thinking or remembering something. She didn't realize it herself, but I hastened to ask if something was wrong. Carl replied, "No, it's a good flavor," but he turned away and walked away. He thought he hadn't expected her to choose this particular scent, which meant this scent was very familiar to him. The guy decided to change the subject a little and say that, in his opinion, the necklace had finally found its owner, and it suited you very well, especially under this modest dress. He came up to Asha and fixed her hair on her face, touching her lightly, but he took his hand away immediately so that it didn't mean anything. As he left, Carlile asked the maid if he had been able to finish the preparations before the vows ceremony. The woman replied, "Of course," and proceeded to complete the look. When Carlile left the room, Asha touched the same spot where he had stroked her. Carlile. She thought the prince's hand should be soft, but no, this is a warrior's hand. The girl noticed that her heart was beating much faster than usual. But then, she immediately thought about the fact that he was the commander-in-chief, so it was no wonder he had such hands. After the romance, Asha thought again about the necklace. She imagined, "Now that's a necklace, so many days you can buy martial arts. Ugh, that's so cool." A few days passed. The day of Carlile and Asha's vows ceremony arrived. The invited guests began to gather in the church hall. Even though this is a modest wedding, there will still be some number of guests at the ceremony. Like at any wedding, people are always chatting, but at this one, they were gossiping, discussing that His Majesty will actually marry this girl. If he gets the title of Crown Prince again, he can divorce her. And after the divorce will be perfectly capable of creating a family with Miss Cecilia Dupré, a potential candidate for the Crown Prince's wife, who will not sit idly by. Instead of strength, she was also present at the ceremony today. She'd also heard all the gossip, not just about Carl or his new bride, but about herself, and she loved that they were now talking about her. His Majesty insisted on marrying the Marquise because Pervez is under extraterritorial jurisdiction. Whatever happens there, the Imperial family cannot interfere. Also, because of this, the Crown Prince can try to test his wife candidates. Some have already backed off, but Cecilia has no reason to give up. The situation is better for her than for anyone else. Her golden eyes are the symbol of the Imperial family. They're the reason she'll be favored. Not only the Empress, but also the Emperor's lover has golden eyes, which gave them their titles. In this situation, Cecilia, more than the Marquise Pervez, deserves the place and the Crown Prince himself. She will prove it to everyone here. Music was heard, and the trumpeter began to play a pre-wedding melody. This meant that the bride and groom had already arrived at the church. The first to enter the hall were the Emperor and his wife, the Empress. Behind them walked the head priest of the temple, Gabriel Knox. People saw the priest and began to discuss again. "Oh, it looks like for conducting the ceremony, and Mr. Gabriel is the most beautiful people in the capital." The discussion continued by saying that no one would even look at the bride. Everyone remembered that she had stood confidently before His Majesty then. But what about today? How will she behave? Even if she dressed up, she'd look like a savage, a redneck. She's lucky she's shameless. It was announced in the hall that His Highness Prince Carlile Kenrick and the Marquis Asha Amir del Perez had arrived. All the invited guests immediately began to look around, and when they saw the bride and groom, there was a general sound in the hall. "Oh, who is it?" "No way, it's definitely a feral princess." Asha and Carlile entered the hall and slowly made their way down the aisle for the vows. The women who sat in the front rows and saw the girl with Empress Evelyn's necklace were very indignant. It was such an expensive gift. They thought that there was nothing left of Evelyn anymore. The women gossiped, saying that they thought His Highness had gotten rid of all the things. Perhaps they're sure it's just for show. The pair walked past Cecilia, and the girl gave them an unkind look as well. A look of slight envy, and the fact that she'd still fight. The priest stood at the altar and said that he asked everyone to take their seats. They were all invited to be witnesses on this solemn day for the marriage ceremony of the first prince of the empire, Chad Carlile, and the Marquis of Asha. The god of harmony and balance, Sinlivato, and the god of love, Apodelis, bless you. Like any other girl, if the marriage was for love, the thoughts would be happy. And only Asha stood and thought that this was some kind of endless speech. People in the capital have nothing to do at all. The priest announced that they could now exchange rings. Carlile had prepared a very beautiful ring for his wife Asha. It shimmered with red and blue colored stones. They were expensive stones. As the guy was putting the ring on the girl's finger, he whispered in her ear that when he sold it, take it to the auction, they would give a lot more. At this point, Asha looked at her ring and would immediately start calculating to me that it was going to an auction, not a jewelry store. Yeah. So they'd give me more money. Carlile stood there thinking that people don't know that this ring is just the bride's emergency fund. At some point, he himself began to respect that he had such a wife, that she had the spirit of a revolutionary. That's what's interesting to him. Then the priest filed the papers and told me to sign the wedding certificate. Asha put her signature, as Carlile had, on the document. The priest then took it to the emperor to be sealed. He did so, but he frowned, for he was not at all happy about the marriage. The priest announced for all to see that their marriage had been made official by imperial and divine law. No one can challenge your relationship. You must keep your vows and treat each other with great responsibility and sincere love. Carlyle's thoughts were not of love for Asha, but of calculation. After all, he had agreed to the marriage for profit. But in addition, it was very pleasant to look at the sad faces of his father and stepmother. It pleased him, and the boy had a smile on his face. Traditionally, in all marriages, vows are always said at the wedding and sealed with a first kiss. And now the priest has announced the first kiss. Why, she'd forgotten that moment. She was very surprised by the kiss. Well, they're officially married, so that's the way it has to be. Carlile realized that she couldn't wait to get completely sorted out and go home, but he was determined that he wasn't going to let her go that easily. Walking over to Asha, he grabbed her waist, hugged her, and kissed her. It was a long kiss and passionate. Asha didn't even expect it. The kiss had gone on so long that she didn't like it anymore. She decided to break it by biting Carlyle's lip. When the guy bounced off her and said, "Hey then, girl," wiping her mouth, asked to behave, "Your Highness." What could Carlile say in response? The usual words, that he was just trying to dispel boredom and nothing personal. The priest, who suspected something amiss, decided to remind the couple that the Lord was always watching them. Be pure in body and soul. To which Carlile replied that the Lord would be sympathetic to the passion of the newlyweds. Asha had dreamed of returning to Pervez as soon as possible, but she thinks it's worth staying a little longer. However, it is urgent to get some goods there, and also to organize suitable quarters for His Highness in the castle. Looking at Dicker, The girl asked to go first to Pervez. The guy got nervous. How would he explain to all their people that she wouldn't be there yet, and the whole situation with the wedding? Finally, Asha's team arrived at the fortress. The boy got down from his horse and went to the people to explain everything to them. When the lad entered the gate of the fortress, the people crowded outside began to question him. Who is he, and where is Asha? And then he had to say that the lady had married the crown prince. The people, of course, had a lot of questions. Someone shouted, "Do you mean to say that she is now a princess? Are they really coming here to live together? And that they'll divorce after 3 years? What will happen to Our Lady?" Some people tried to ask, "He can hear himself, Decker." Decker replied that the crown prince had personal business in Pervez, and they needed money to settle in. Their interests coincided, so His Highness would stay with them for 3 years. The women shouted that they had asked to bring food, not the crown prince. One of the guys who was part of Asha's team said he was honestly worried about the lady. They had been attacked several times on the way here. This fellow's recollection, as they rode through the mountains, he asked, "And why did the crown prince send knights with them?" He was anxious. His partner, sitting next to him on his horse, said, "Maybe because he doesn't trust them." Just as suddenly there was a noise. Dicker saw the attacking gangs ahead and shouted that they were under attack. "Ready your weapons!" Thanks to the fact that they had knights with them, the gang retreated and didn't fight. Decker and his men were of course surprised at what had happened, but they were glad too, to get to the fort in time to reach the fort in peace. In the end, they survived and made it to the fortress. The guy with a scarred face standing next to him said that his middle name had foreseen that they might be attacked, so he had sent his knights as escorts. That's right, without them, they will definitely die. Decker came up to the guys and said that Asha was immersed in routine matters right now. She was in a lot of danger since she wasn't a member of the Imperial family. Though the guy waved his hand in thought, saying that the rest of us shouldn't think about it now, the lady said she only needed money, and in return they would give the prince a place to live. That's all there is to it. The boy has ordered that a restroom be prepared for His Highness. He'll be here in a month, so we'll have to hurry. Dicker hesitated for a moment. He doesn't know if the prince is really on their side, but he doesn't know if he's putting Asha in danger. A few days later. In the Imperial family home, in the Emperor's study, Carlile sits on a sofa singing tea, with the Emperor and his adopted son Marcius across from him. Carlile tries to explain that from now on, the defense of the south of the Empire is now on his shoulders. If there are any more questions? Across from Carlile sat Marcius. He asked fearfully why he had to defend. Carlile explains to Marcius where his thoughts are hovering. He is now the heir, and must do his former job. Marcius sat with frightened eyes. He didn't know what he should do. He didn't like all this, and he didn't feel like complying. Carlile says he fought on the battlefield because his duty as crown prince requires it. Besides, he doesn't have any more responsibilities. Just getting rid of the monsters that show up 2 or 3 times a year and settling minor conflicts. Carlile was pleased with himself. He thought, well, fools, now they realize what reality is. They'd planned to exile him before, but now he was going to Pervez, which was outside the Empire. The Emperor coughed culturally to draw attention to himself and said, "Okay, this is a military matter. Let's talk about the budget he requested." Guy asked, "You mean the devotee and his moving expenses?" The Emperor realized that he, though a prince, the dowry would go to Pervez. He realizes he needs money, but is 50 million varones too much for Pervez? Marcius, too, supported the Emperor, saying, "Yes, it is too much. A much smaller sum would be sufficient to live there." Carlile objected, saying, "Marcius, don't be so frivolous." The boy said, "What's the big deal?" And Carlile added that apparently he'd never been to war before. It took Pervez 28 years to defeat the lawyers. Imagine how much was destroyed and how much money and time it would take to rebuild. "And you say 50 million is a lot, Marcius. Study better." Carlile adjusted his clothes tiredly and told his father that he still had a lot of explaining to do. Poor brother. He'll literally have to learn his craft overnight. When Carlile got to his office, he was still laughing long afterward. "You should have seen their silly faces. They didn't seem to be thinking about military matters at all. Asha asked, "Isn't the Empire a superpower?" The girl thought, "Then why doesn't he seek to gain military power?" Carla replied that if the military affairs of which he spoke were only concerned with the management of the knights by order of the Emperor, but that only the governor could declare war. And so the last person to give orders is responsible for losing the war, because he is the leader. If he lost one day in their opinion, he would be held accountable. Asha then voiced her opinion that she thought he was just trying to get him out of the Imperial palace. She thought, the Emperor has the power, but he's not the one responsible. Carlile said enthusiastically, "It's so obvious that even a girl from the village understood. Isn't it wonderful that you have such a great husband?" Asha said sadly that yes, it was like he had been in a burning hell, but his calmness with which he got through everything and didn't commit suicide admires her. Carlile was a little confused. Was she complimenting him or insulting him? Asha replied that it was a compliment. Carlile wondered. He wouldn't have paid attention if someone else had said that. Maybe it was because she was being sincere. An older man with gray hair and a beard stood next to Asha in the office. He said that they both needed a common goal since they hadn't decided to get in the same boat. "Your Highness, from what I've heard, the Marquis doesn't know anything." Carlile was thinking about it himself. Well, if he thinks so, Viscount Lepelta. But just as suddenly Carlile remembered that he hadn't introduced them yet today, and they were meeting for the first time today. Guy said, "Asha, meet Viscount Gilles Lepelt, his professor and role model. He is the one who most wishes to be rid of his enemies." Carlile noted that he had thought he would be the one to oppose their marriage. The Viscount answered him that he had no choice but to change strategy, because he had fallen for the Empress's ruse and lost his title, the crown of prince, in his absence. That's why he asks Asha what she knows about His Highness. Natasha replied that she knew he had been appointed crown prince from birth, and that he was the best knight in the empire. The Viscount began to tell that His Highness was born with the blessing of Agaris, the god of war and victory, thanks to whom he is talented in using various kinds of combat techniques. Asha interjected in surprise. "What, with a blessing? It's literally a blessing from God himself?" The Viscount replied, "Yes, the temple made the prophecy, and when His Highness becomes an adult, he will prove that the prophecy was correct. He is the one who kept an empire in peace after going through many battles." Now, was that wise? To deprive him of his title, how dare she dare by cunning obtain his punishment, angered the Viscount. Then Carlile asked him to calm down. Perhaps it is grace hiding beneath the countenance of a curse. The Viscount objected, saying no. They are bound to do something about it. After all, you've been accused of wanting to possess your father's favorite. You can't turn a blind eye to that. Sasha was surprised at how falsely she had thought he had gone into that room on purpose. The Vicomte explained that the role of the Marquise was also important. The girl immediately responded to what she could do to help. The Empress and the second principal will attempt to defame His Highness's reputation. Protect him when that happens. Asha got excited. She said she would watch over him day and night. Carlile smiled genuinely and said that he was physically able to protect himself. He didn't need to worry about that. It is important to him that she becomes his shield in the field of politics. Asha asked the politicians. The Viscount answered yes. The Imperial family is sensitive about their image. That's why they couldn't object to your choice. Thanks to you, His Highness will move far away and be able to build up his power there without being seen by the Imperial family and the Empress. That wouldn't please him at all. Asha wondered if he had accepted the marriage proposal so that he could gain strength in Pervez. The Empress will try to either poach you or pressure you to divorce. Depending on the situation, the consequences may vary. Asha thought for a moment. Indeed, it could be dangerous, she said. Is it logical to prepare for a coup d'état in Pervez? Replied, of course this matter is also troubling. While he was involved in battles, the Empress has greatly increased her influence. That's why he needs to settle down somewhere and expand his own. "Century," he said, "it is His Majesty's duty to restore the prince to his rights, and so the public believes." The girl replied that she understood. She realized until you leave for Pervez, Carlile must take care of himself, and there they will not interfere with his affairs. She'll protect him as best she can, need to save their marriage, and afterward to separate quietly, when the time comes. Why? Confirmed that she was willing to do so, but he also asked Carlile that she try not to ruin herself. The girl noticed that he was worried about her, but thought she needed to keep a low profile. Carlile said after all this, they will reap sweet rewards in the future. Asha understood, but decided to warn him in advance. Everything he needs to take from here. Carlile interrupted her, saying, "And what do you wish? He can even borrow a needle." Carla took away the banter again, saying he believed it. His father was shocked too. "No, it's just that there's literally nothing in Pervez. As an example, she'll lend you a needle, but its condition will be far worse than the one you can get here." Caravel asked her not to worry. After all, he had already made a list of everything he needed. A few days later, departure for Pervez. In front of the palace there are a lot of horse-drawn wagons and a lot of boxes and barrels. The servants are loading all this into the wagons. When Asha came outside, she was thrilled to see so much food, seeds, and everything she had requested for her people. Carlile came up to her and asked if she liked it. The girl was delighted. She admits that she didn't expect such a scale. She couldn't even imagine anything like this. Carlile decided to make a joke, saying that her father was shocked too. Asha went to one of the bags, opened it, and began to feel the seeds in it. She thought that if they grew these seeds, Pervez would be rich. She made the right choice. Without that chance, Pervez would never have gotten out of poverty. Carlile commanded that it was time to go. The girl who had thrown the seeds back into the bag said, "Yes, she's ready." They headed for the carriage. Passing by the main street, those people who were seeing Charles off cheered, "Wow, it's His Highness the Prince! Hurrah, bless him, Your Highness!" Watching these people, you could definitely tell that they love Carlile. They all admire and wish him well. Children run up and ask for candy, and he always gives it out. Asha remained in the carriage. She watched all of this, and thought about how he was far more loved than she realized. Had he earned her trust while he was crown prince? Counselor Lionel rode in the carriage with them. Asha decided to ask him, "Do the people seem to like Carlile?" The guy asked if that was sarcasm, because somehow the question sounded different in her voice, and the girl replied partially. Lionel replied that this was the whole point of the role of military commander-in-chief. To regain his title as crown prince and prepare to become emperor, one must win the trust of the people. Lionel warned the girl to start getting used to serving him. She realized that he was calculating all his moves. As he plumped into the carriage seat, he said that he was tired, that he had done a good job. Carlile asked his counselor, "Where else will they stop?" The fellow looked at the list he had in his hand and said, "Ovendome." They would be arriving there in 2 days. Carlile noticed Asha staring at him very intensely. When he looked back at her, he asked her why she was staring. The girl felt that there was a great distance between him and the people who were glad of his visit. Carlile was a little indignant. Does she really mean that he's doing something wrong? They're happy, and he's happy to treat them well. Asha thought for a moment. He plays out these performances to fulfill people's expectations. At first glance, it may seem like a gimmick, a game that everyone came to see for free. Of course, there's hardly anything wrong with that, because that's the mindset staring out the window, Asha thought. The carriage pulled up to a lovely lake, and there was a huge clearing to camp in. The knight, descending from his horse, shouted, "Prepare His Highness's tent and also gather branches for the fire and start preparing dinner. Guards, remain vigilant and keep near the carriage in 2 shifts." There was a knock on the carriage, and when they opened the door they saw a servant. He looked at Asha and said he would take the things to your tent. "If you need anything, feel free to ask." "I apologize if—" Asha became indignant, saying, "Wait, to our tent." The servant apologized and became nervous all at once. Did he really take the things to the wrong place? The girl said, No, that's right. Suddenly she said she would sleep separately. At that moment Carlile asked the servant to ignore him. He would call him when he needed him. The servant asked and ran away so as not to disturb the conversation. Asha said, "Your Highness, the servant took her things to your tent after all." The boy said he had heard. No need to repeat himself. He asked, "Surely it matters to you to sleep in the other tent?" The girl replied, "Not particularly." He opened the carriage door, getting ready to get out. He continued, "Then don't make the servant suffer again, and stay in his tent. Don't forget that officially they are spouses." Age replied, "All right, if it pleases you." Left alone in the carriage, she thought about the fact that rumor had it that he was even on the battlefield looking for a woman. He didn't care about having to share a tent with someone like her. Then the girl spun her head in different directions, realized she needed to know these bad thoughts from her head. Whatever it was, they were only a couple on paper, so there was no harm in being close. After that, the girl got up and left the carriage. She kept thinking about the fact that she had slept next to men in the open during the war, but with such a stranger, and in the same tent. It's to be expected, though, since they're not technically married. Asha stepped out to get some air by the lake and reflect a little on the fact that her upbringing was not treated with the same care as in the homes of the ladies of the capital. How insignificant her experiences were. When she was younger, forever after playing games, she fell asleep in her brother's room, but later she never got to share a room with a man. What her parents would think if they saw her now. Through a marriage of convenience, countless money and resources will pour into the hands of the house, but there is a chance that they may be in danger. Pervez's fate is now in the hands of the Duke of Carlile. I'm asking everyone I can to keep an eye on Pervez. For a moment, Asha thought her father screamed. She herself is the shield of their home, and only she can protect it. The girl seemed to come to her senses a little. She thought right. No need to give slack. After all, she was the one who made the pact with the Duke without thinking for a second. She dipped her head in the water, just for fun, tilting it. Afterward, clutching her face, she tried to pull herself together. After all, she had made a decision and would be held responsible for it. After that, the girl headed for the tent. At that moment, Carlile was peeking at her. He was standing behind a tree and saw everything Asha was doing. As he approached the water, he thought that he had never seen a woman so Suvura wash herself. If she hit herself, all her teeth might fall out. When Carlile put his hand up, it was ice water too. He thought Asha was a very interesting person. After Carlile washed up, he headed to the tent as well. When he came in, he sighed when he saw Asha making her bed on the floor. He asked her if she was really going to sleep on the floor. Carlile did not object. If she liked to be uncomfortable there, he would not discourage her. The girl replied firmly that she would sleep on the floor. To keep the conversation going, Carlile said, "Maybe it's the proximity to the north that makes the water colder." And at that moment, he was unbuttoning his shirt in preparation for sleep. Taking off his shirt, he had gorgeous abs and very strong arms. But to Asha, it was indifferent. She kept the conversation going, saying it would get worse in the fall. Carlile noticed that she was looking at him as if she didn't care whether he had clothes on or not. But they were only a contract couple after all. Guy turned to her saying, "Marquise, he would prefer her to help him as his wife and temporary assistant." Asha jumped up from the floor and said, "I'm sorry. Somehow she didn't realize it herself." Afterward, the girl picked up the shirt on his bed. Walking over to Carlile, she said, "If she does anything wrong, be so kind as to forgive her." Carlile replied, "Okay." Asha then proceeded to put on a nightgown shirt for Carlile. He noticed that she really seemed to be concentrating on the clothes, because she was very carefully putting that shirt on and scrutinizing every detail. I thought he'd been told his body would win over any girl. So it was only men who admired it? On the battlefield, there was no way to show off to a woman, so he couldn't know. When Asha finished, she said, "Ready." Looking at him, she interjected, "Is something bothering you?" Carlile replied that he felt a little sick, but it was nothing. Asha interjected, I'm sorry that... Carlile quickly got into bed and said, "Nothing. Go to bed, please." The girl felt a little frustrated. She realized that perhaps the servant would have done a better job than she did. Did one really have to be so demonstrative about it? She realized that if their relationship was like this from now on, there would be no difficulty. Since he'd been with many women before, he certainly wouldn't be interested in her. Carlile asked him, "Can he put out the candles?" And Asha said, "Okay." The boy stood up, put them out, and the candles smelled like smoke. It was beautiful in the twilight. After which Carlile asked, "Are you comfortable with the blanket? It seems thin." But Asha replied that she was used to sleeping on a spread there on the ground, so now the conditions were just luxurious. Carlile couldn't sleep, spinning around. He asked Asha to tell him about Pervez. It was just that they were going to be there soon, and he wanted to know something beforehand. The boy turned on the bed toward Asha and said, "How cold is it there in winter?" The girl replied that it was hard for her to say, she had nothing to compare it to. But the merchants say it's so cold there that their goodies risk falling off. Hearing this made Carlile laugh a lot, but Asha couldn't understand what was so funny. In the capital, laughing at the words of another is the norm of ethics, the girl thought. Carlile laughed so hard that he burst into tears. Then he calmed down and asked, "Was she the one who cut off the head of the lawyer chief?" Asha replied, "Yes." Then Carlile added, "Surely he must have been very capable." The girl replied that he wasn't bad, but not as strong as her father. She went on to say that the lack of men caused her father and brothers to die, and Lakshmusha, 28 years of fighting, the spell of the necklace of the god of murder, kept him young. Guy clarified, "She means the item that was presented as a trophy." Asha replied, "Yes, they owe the victory to their father and brothers, who defended Pervez from the barbarians until the very end." Carlile asked, "Amir Pervez was a great warrior, wasn't he? After all, his father had sent him the first time secretly, wanting him dead. For those who went there didn't even last a year, committing suicide." Asha thought that her father probably knew of the Emperor's intentions, but since he was threatened with death anyway, he decided to try to avoid it at all costs. Carlile listened intently to the tale of how the people of Pervez listened to her father's will, because he alone had not surrendered, and was preparing them to fight the barbarians. The boy thought he was the only one who hadn't run away in a hopeless situation, and for that they were loyal to him. It would be better for such a man to go on with his life. He didn't abandon Pervez, and spent every day fighting to save him, and she is the same. She managed to make the Emperor pay her for her victory through her chutzpah. Perhaps Asha is far greater than her father. Carlile decided to ask now about her brothers, how old they were. Turning to her, he said, "Marquise." But the girl was already sweetly asleep. Meanwhile, at the Emperor's estate, Marcius is shouting to his mother that she doesn't want him to fight instead of that creep Carlile. Yes, he'll never set foot on the battlefield, but his mother assured him not to worry. She had already thought of everything. A few days later, the Pervez carriages were slowly approaching the fortress with wagons of provisions. They were hurrying to their new home. In the carriage, Carlile, looking out the window, shared his opinion that things were worse than he thought. Asha hurriedly explained to him what he meant about the roads. After such a long war, the guy said it wasn't just about them. It had been a long time since they'd entered Pervez's territory, and everything was completely different from what it should be. There were fields, dirt, and no people to be seen. "Asha, you'll have to do some settling in here. How much do you want to get from his father?" The girl replied that she only wanted for food and medicine for the first time, and it would take about 500,000 verons to recover. The guy laughed and said, "Geez, is that even enough for anything? Or do you plan to leave this world without regrets in a year or two?" Asha wondered if she had exaggerated the amount she was thinking so much. How would he react to the truth? Besides, the king doesn't even want to give that much money. Carlile said with a clever expression on his face that she had drawn the best option possible and congratulated her. The girl said, "Yeah, really?" The guy clarified, "She was the one who belittled him so neatly," and Asha smiled. "That's right," Carlile said. Those 500,000 Veronians are barely enough to get us through this winter. And if not, a lot of people will die again, to prepare for the next one. As they got out of the carriage, she said that although the place had been cleaned up, their stay with them might not be comfortable due to the state of the castle. Carlile indignantly replied to her that if he wasn't mistaken, she'd said it 100 times already. The girl figured he'd been on the battlefield since his youth, so he was unlikely to complain about where he'd have to sleep. After all, the tent suited him just fine. They were met on the threshold by a dicker. The boy bowed, saying, "Welcome." The pair entered the castle and were greeted by servants who stood on either side of the corridor, bowing. That was how they greeted them. Asha was very worried. People a little he wouldn't think they had treated him. Behind them walked Carlile's counselor and servant. The counselor said they would have to stay here, and the servant said, "Oh, come on." He asked how they would be able to serve His Highness in a place like this. Asha herself realized that he had come all this way to be here. And yet she had been warned, looking into his eyes. She realized he was already regretting coming. Carlile broke the silence and said, "Where are his quarters?" And Asha said, "The entire second floor has been set aside for him. He and your closest associates and guests can stay there." With that, Carlile asked her because the second floor was usually where the local ruler's family lived. Where would she sleep then? The girl replied that she could stay on the first floor. Carlile thanked Asha. The girl simply bowed modestly. Lionel ordered, telling everyone to carry their luggage to the second floor. Dicker came up to Asha and put his arm around her shoulder. He said she'd been given his room and asked if she'd like to see it. The servants had done their best there. Asha asked in surprise, "Why?" To which Dicker replied that the war was over and should now be treated as it should be. When Asha and Dicker entered the castle, Carlile met them nearby. He noticed that Asha was smiling, even laughing. But she didn't act like that with him. When they entered Asha's room, the girl laughed for a long time. She asked seriously, "This room was decorated in all the colors of a girl, but I'm far from being a girl anymore." Asha looked at the guy with the scar on his face and asked him, "Hands on?" The guy hesitated, said he liked it. The boy explained that the nobles in the capital slept on similar beds, so he tried to make something similar. Asha walked over to the post by the bed, which then held the canopy. It was hand-carved wood. She said, "Wow, Basti, he did a great job recreating something he's only seen a couple times." Asha thought about the fact that even these guys had noticed how big the difference between the capital and Pervez was. "Whatever," she answered him. "Thank you. This is the first time I'll be sleeping on such a luxurious bed." But the guy was worried about whether she actually liked it. She's just a little embarrassed because who would have thought that one day her room would be decorated with flowers? After all, in Pervez, flowers are a sign of the end of the war. It seems the servants brought them to her on purpose. "Good work," the maid said, bowing and thanking her for her praise, even though there was still much unfinished here. "That Ramir's wife did the most work, by the way. The butler's place is vacant, isn't it?" "Yeah. All this time Della's been doing his job. She'll try to find someone as soon as possible. The news of the prince's arrival has already spread around, so there won't be any problems." Della turned to Asha, saying, "Your ladyship, it is worth hiring a maid to run small errands, as your way of life will now be evaluated by different people." Asha hesitated. Judging by their reactions, they'd easily find something to pick on, so she asked, "Is there anyone Della can recommend?" Della replied that she had already found one girl and shouted, "Nina, come into the room." A pretty young girl entered. She said, "Hello, your ladyship. My name is Nina Colon." Della advised that she would clean her rest and prepare food, water for washing, take care of her clothes and belongings. Of course, and also help comb and bathe her. Surprised, she thought, even washing. Della said that they didn't have much luxury during the war, but things have changed now. Asha said, "Good. Then I'll count on her." Nina, the maid, bowed, signifying that she understood. Asha thanked everyone on her team and the maids for a great job, letting them go to rest. She asked Dicker and Della to stay, though. She needed to talk to them. The girl announced that the next day would be a busy one, as goods for Pervez were being brought in. and there might be conflict between the prince's men and their own. She emphasized that she was not going to ask her people to be silent where they did not want to be. She had made a deal that was good for both sides, not a slave contract, and she was going to stick to that approach. She asked them to do everything possible for Pervez's well-being. The next day his counselor came to see him in Carlile's office. Carlile said that he had first of all allocated funds to those living in Pervez for a whole month. Then he continued, but to his surprise, they, according to the counselor, did not even take a penny for themselves. Those who are accustomed to suffer together are attached to each other. This was unexpected news considering they all look like bandits, especially the man with long hair who was famously talking to the Marquise. He pointed out that even though they are related to the Marquise only on paper, there is no guarantee that she will not betray them. Therefore, it is necessary to cautiously study all the important people. Special attention should be paid to the big guy who was sticking it to the Marquise. The counselor asked who he was talking about. He is the eldest son of the Donovan family, who were vassals of Emir Pervez and were once claimants to Asha Pervez's hand.